talk I'm going to give is fairly interesting. I'm going to give sort of a discussion about where this all came from and what I've discovered since I started doing this. And we'll finish up with a little bit of issues, a little bit of a warning about the issues, and then we'll do Q&A. And there will be a caveat in the Q&A that I'll remind you of later, which is this. When somebody has an issues-based question, we're going to find out, does anybody else actually care? And then we'll decide accordingly. And to give you an example, so I talked to the Libertarian Party recently where a guy stormed out of the room because we gave the wrong answer on the 10th Amendment question. So if your issues, and I had to look it up, because I was like, I remember don't covet your neighbor's ass from the Bible, but I forgot what the amendment was. And states' rights, as it turns out, and I guess he thought I was against states' rights as a gubernatorial candidate. Not sure how that happens, but okay. But yeah, so if somebody's like, but I really care about the 10th Amendment, well, we'll have a conversation later about that. It's not that I'm not going to answer the question, but if nobody else cares, then let's not worry about it. So that's the basics there. So to begin with, so I'm assuming most of you guys know FARC, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, perfect. Okay, good. So I don't have to do too much of an introduction about that. To give you an idea, like sort of like my personal life philosophy is that occasionally something will happen in your life that takes you in a different direction than you thought. And I like to tell people that it's like, the biggest mistakes I see people making in their lives is you have this like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for your life. And if you're younger, if you're in college, you're like step 3 is college. And like step 4 is get a job. Step 5 is find a partner. Step 6 might be having kids or not. Develop a life together or not. Build for retirement, retire, and so that's a step 10 thing. And when I run into people who aren't doing it right, the problem is that they are sticking so solidly to the list of things that they made out for themselves that they're unwilling to change, and that's when they run into issues. To give you an example, I have a friend of mine who is convinced that she should be a doctor, and she's totally capable of being a doctor. She's really, really smart. She's not suited for it at all. She's more of an entrepreneur. And she will eventually become a doctor, but she's finding it very hard. And I keep telling her, it's like, if instead what you did, instead of becoming a doctor, what you really ought to consider doing is, what do you like doing? And no matter how weird that is, just go do that. And the reason why is because you can't really function on a daily life if you hate the thing you do, no matter how much money it makes. I have a friend who's golden handcuffed to his job that he hates. He makes $1 million a year in New York City. And he hates life. It's like, what's the point of that? He's got a lot of money and life sucks. It's not good. And so my measure on how to do that is like the story of my life has been sort of backing into these things and just going with it. So for example, I was not an entrepreneur in college as far as I knew. I was not even in college to do computer science, but I ended up taking a class and I liked it. And I thought, well, okay, if I enjoy the homework for this, then I probably had to just do this. Like, this should be a career. And I did. And I loved it. It was great. It was perfect. And I came out with a comp sci degree instead of a history degree, much to my surprise, and just kind of ran. And then about 6 months later, a friend of mine said, hey, we should start up an ISP in Frankfurt because there isn't one. And I'm like, well, that seems like a market opportunity. And so I just started researching, well, how do you do that? And set it up on my credit cards. Terrible idea. Don't do that, ever. Whenever I hear people saying they did that, they brag, but I'm like, anybody who's done that knows, like, don't do that. But it ran for about 6 years and it worked out pretty well. FARC, the thing that I'm best known for, started in 1999, which was midway through that process. And that was a perfect example of something that wasn't a complete change in direction. It's still computer science related. I built it because I was just trying to keep my programming skills sharp, and I wanted to see if I could. And then it started gaining traction to the point where 2002 my ISP goes bankrupt because, for the same reason they all went bankrupt. Eventually the telecoms came and took it all back, which is totally fine because I don't think I would have enjoyed doing that for another 15 years as much as I've enjoyed doing FARC for the last 16. And so FARC took off and it was like, well, this wasn't supposed to be a business, but it's working. So I'll just, how do we make this work better? What's the best way to do it? How do you structure a business? How do you expand? How do you grow, scale, all that kind of stuff? In 2008, right after the financial collapse, I started reading articles about how did this happen? Like, what caused this? How did nobody see this coming? And it wasn't that nobody did, but few people did. And got really interested to the point where I finally ended up reading a book called This Time It's Different. It's like this thick. It's like 800 pages. And it is a treatise on currency collapses dating back to, I think it was like Louis XII in France, right around the time France became a country, and how these things have occurred again and again over history. And the title of the book is actually a joke. The title of the book is This Time It's Different. The book actually explains why it's not, and it never is. Which even fascinated me more, because are you telling me we have 800 years of financial data and we still don't understand when these things happen? It seems kind of bizarre, but that actually is the case. So I got interested in that, and I thought, I really like this business stuff. I was self-taught, and I don't know anything about finance or accounting or whatever, and so I started thinking about getting an MBA. But the problem is that in the business world, entrepreneurs hate people with MBAs because they're mostly douchebags. And MBAs hate entrepreneurs because they mostly don't pay attention and they're actually very risk prone and they do dumb stuff that you could avoid. And whenever I hear an argument like that, it's like, as a programmer, it's when somebody asks you, like, what is the best database language? And if you ask somebody that, they'll say, oh, it's this, and they're absolutely convinced. And the reason why usually is because they don't know a second language. They know the one they know, they don't have anything to compare it to. And so my thing was like, well, but I got to find somebody who's an entrepreneur who has an MBA in order to figure out whether this is worth it or not. And a friend of mine was, and he said, here's the deal. He's like, you'd probably like it. That's probably enough reason for you to do it, give it a shot. And I was like, all right, sure. So I applied, I got in, and in 2011, I started an MBA it was a joint program between Columbia and Haas Cal Berkeley. And these are two very distinguished business schools with two completely different philosophies about business. Like Haas is all about sustainability. How do you make money off of renewables and all that kind of stuff? And Columbia is like, how do you write high-speed trading algorithms that break the stock market? I mean, that's not really what they teach, but it's that different. And I really enjoyed seeing the different sort of philosophies with it, and came out discovering that I'm actually very good at forensic accounting, strangely. Now, I haven't made a career out of that, but it turns out if you're good at forensic accounting, you can make a lot of good stock market moves off of that because you can predict what they're about to do because they leave this stuff in plain sight. So again, not something I'd ever considered doing. The MBA was important for a couple of reasons. I learned a few things in there that were not necessarily taught. And one of the most fascinating things is somebody actually gave an answer to what I thought was the stupidest question ever asked by a student in an MBA program. It turns out there's a long list of those, but I thought this was particularly dumb. We had a guy in there who, his name was Jim Breyer. He founded Breyer's Ice Cream. And in 1980, he was driving home after his restaurant had gone bankrupt the week prior, pulled into this ice cream place for ice cream, trying to figure out what the hell his next step was going to be in his life. Walks in, the place is empty, and the owner is on the phone in the back, and he's on the phone sobbing and crying and begging with somebody for something. And he's like, this is really uncomfortable walking in on that. But he decided to wait. He overhears a little bit of what's going on, and the guy's basically saying, don't foreclose on me, don't shut me down. Hangs up, the guy's just sobbing, and he goes, what's wrong? And he goes, I can't make payroll, and I have 15 employees, and they're all going to be out of business. And so he was like, just sort of intrigued because restaurants and ice cream stores are not the same thing, but not significantly different. Got into a conversation with this guy. This is like Friday night. Decides Saturday morning when he wakes up he's going to buy the company. Calls a couple of his Harvard MBA guys out on the East Coast, secures a loan for $100,000 and buys that thing on Monday, and then, 25 years later sells it to Nestle for $16 billion. Now the stupid question was, how did you know when you walked in there that night in 1980 that was the thing to do? And I'm like, are you kidding me? He had no idea. And he actually said the same thing. And that's why I thought it was a stupid question. But the other question was, well, how do you know? And I was like, so with me, I always just sort of gut it out, but that's just how I operate. But I never had a framework for being able to explain how I do that. And he gave the answer that I tell everybody. He said, you know that an opportunity is worth taking when you wake up for the third night in a row in a cold sweat because you're afraid you won't do it. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. And that's how I got into this. The genesis of it was I was bitching about how the quality of candidates for the next governor's race was not particularly high. It's not particularly low. It's just no different than any other time. It's like we get the same stuff. Everybody's got their sort of laundry list. All the Republican candidates have the same platform. The Democrats almost identical. They're impossible to tell apart for the most part. And I got into talking with some people about, why can't we get normal people to run? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And the reason why, of course, is because it sucks, right? I mean, who wants to put themselves through all that crap, right? I mean, you're in the media spotlight, there's all kinds of, stuff heaped on you, you don't know what you're doing, the barriers to entry are really high. Who would do that? And my friend said, you should do that. And I was like, but I don't want to. And they said, well, there's your problem. Because they said, of all the people capable of pulling this off, it's you. And if you won't do it, how could we expect anybody else to jump in? And I thought, that's a really good point. That wasn't what convinced me, though. What convinced me was I have a friend who was in a similar situation on a smaller scale. She's a family court attorney, and she kept on running into a judge in one of the local, I don't know if they call them districts or circuits. Do you remember, Heather? Districts? It was Bourbon, Scott, a little bit of Franklin, and Woodford. And the judge, she was just having a hard time with some of the decisions that were being handed down because she just disagreed with them a lot, and a lot of people shared that opinion. And exact same situation, that woman was going to come up for re-election and did in 2014, and the question was, somebody has to do something. Well, at the time she was going to run unopposed because nobody wanted to put themselves through that, and so my friend said, okay, fine, the hell with it, I'll do it. And so she stood up, put herself in, and won. And it was stunning too. And won because when she got in there, basically the problem that everybody knew existed was, how can we change this? Are we stuck with this? And running unopposed, everybody had just sort of given up. Somebody appears who going, okay, look, I'm going to do something completely different. Not the same thing that this person is doing. But she did the same thing. I'm not a politician. I've never done this before, but my intentions are to do a good job. And her pitch was actually, she's like, I was never suited to be a lawyer because as a lawyer, you're supposed to advocate for your client. The problem with that is that she was always seeing the other side's point. And as an attorney, although that makes you a very good person, that makes you not a very good attorney. However, it does make you a fantastic judge, as it turns out. I talked to her a couple of weeks after she started, and she said, I was built for this. This is exactly the thing that I needed to be doing. And I thought, that's really interesting because, she jumped in and did it. And so it was that win that finally convinced me, it's like, okay, it's game on. I got to take a shot at this. Let's see what happens. And initially, I was treating it sort of like, okay, we'll just give it a shot, hopefully I'll win, whatever. And I got into an argument with a friend of mine one night where he basically called me out and he said, dude, he's like, no, you have to be like, I'm going to win. And I'm like, but I don't know that I'm going to win. He's like, no, you have to. He said, because otherwise you're just wasting our time. Do you actually care or not? And I go, I care. And so we got in this argument. We got in a very heated argument about it. And I went home and I woke up the next day and I called him and was like, dude, I guess I really do care a lot because I wouldn't have been yelling at you so much last night if I actually did not care. And so that was sort of the beginning. Like, okay, now I'm locked in on this thing. Now I want to win. And the trick has been is that since I've been doing this, part of the process has been people are like, okay, so these things are wrong. How are you going to fix them? And initially my answer was, I don't know. I'll check it out. And I still have that answer for a couple of things, by the way, so don't be surprised if that comes up. But as that's been going, I have started coming across some very interesting solutions, and in some cases, some things that have been done in a couple of places that worked that are very easy to copy and implement here if there was the political will to do it. And whether or not that'll be the case if I get elected, we'll see. But I'll be doing my best to make sure they get rammed through. So what happened when I decided to do this so then you have to examine the process. It's like, okay, so how do you get on the ballot? And so there's a couple of ways. The easiest way is go, okay, I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I'm just going to go ahead and pick a party, and I'm going to jump into the race, and we'll see how it goes. Well, so interestingly, the parties have already decided who their candidates are before the races start. And they have a charter that says that they can't lock you out, but that doesn't mean they're going to help you. And so it turns out that the parties at the time I was looking at it had decided who their candidates were. And they seem okay. I don't mind them too much. I don't think they're going to do a terrible job. But at the same time, I think I could do better because I don't have party oversight. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just go ahead and go it alone then because this is probably the only way to do it. It's harder to go it alone, but the reason why it's important is because what I started coming across when I started talking to people who had made runs at stuff. And in particular, the fact that if you are not the chosen candidate or for whatever other reason you are not a candidate that fits whatever the hell the paradigm is that they're looking for in the parties, they will actually bounce you out on purpose. To give you sort of a better explanation of what I think this is, I think that parties like their candidates to be the same way that Disney likes its child stars, replaceable at a moment's notice. Disney would like you to be popular enough, but never get to the point where you can negotiate a $2 million contract. Because at that point, now you're just expensive and they're not making as much money off of you, and so they want you to be replaceable. So they have this whole stable of kids coming through that if anybody catches fire, they can bounce you out. Like Miley Cyrus, for example, became famous more or less on her own because Disney kind of did the same thing. But she managed to pull it off, so it's not exactly impossible. But so it turns out that that is one of the reasons why all of the candidates look kind of alike. It's because they're replaceable. That's actually in the benefit of the party, either party, doesn't matter which. They do not want to have politicians get elected who can actually start calling their own shots. This actually like destabilizes the party, because if you think about how parties make their money, they sell influence, and that's it. Nobody's going to give money to a party unless they can get something out of it, for the most part. I mean, us as citizens might kick them $5 or $10. We're not expecting anything to come out of it. But if you're throwing $1,000 at a party, you're expecting something. And the problem is that if it turns out that it might be the case that parties might not be able to sell influence, that breaks the entire system completely. And I actually have to believe that if parties just sit around trying to figure out what does the end game for us as entities look like, it's people like me getting elected without them. Because now, are they selling influence? Can they sell influence if I get elected as governor and they can't buy me? I've got a veto and I'm doing it under my own volition. They can't buy anybody. There's no law they can buy that will get by me unless it's good. And so this sort of like starts breaking the system down, and it ends up being the end, in my opinion. So the parties have this very vested interest in locking out individuals. And so in the process of filing, we discovered that there's a number of lockouts in this thing. Not only is it difficult to run for office for all of the reasons I mentioned earlier about all the attention and media savvy, the amount of money it takes to do it, but then there's even more lockouts that are in place. So for example, in order to get on the ballot, as if you stop by my booth, has been explained already, I need to get 5,000 signatures. The reason why is because they don't want just anybody getting on the ballot. I mean, who do you think passed that law? You know, it wasn't like, did any bunch of citizens demand, oh, you know what, we demand that you guys have a 5,000 signature lockout to stop candidates from getting the ballot. No, the parties did that. And they did it to protect themselves. And the reason why, like I said again, is to keep that many candidates off the ballot, because politics is a lot like poker. Do you guys play poker much at all? So there's a lot of strategy in Hold'em, and one of the main strategies is that you were playing a game with 10 people. Strategy number one is get people out of the game as soon as possible, because if all 10 people are there for all 7 cards, one of them might get lucky, and then you're screwed. And politics works the same way. You want to get as many people off of the ballot as possible, because that increases the chance that somebody might get lucky, or decreases the chance, and then basically allows you to keep your position. And so what's interesting about the 5,000 signature thing is that it isn't just 5,000. In fact, I took a look at it. Gatewood Galbraith traditionally would get 10. I talked to the Libertarians who got a candidate on the ballot for Senate last time. They went for 7.5, because the minute you file these things, they're all contested like all day long. And really just to get people off the ballot again, I mean, is there any like special threshold? Like, let's say, for example, I got 4,500 signatures. Does that make me ballot unworthy? I couldn't close the gap on the last 500? You know, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me, honestly. So again, it's just a lockout to try to keep people from getting on the ballot. There's that one. There also is the problem of initially in the campaign, we had a real hard time getting organized before filing, because you cannot raise money until you file. You cannot file until you have a running mate. You must have a running mate on your team who is of the same party as you. And by the way, getting a running mate for lieutenant governor is really hard. We took a look at people who may be tied to politics or might be like another entrepreneur or something like that. And it turns out that lieutenant governor has absolutely no powers whatsoever, except if I die, they're in charge. The end. That's it. And so if you're a politician, this isn't really a compelling promise, because what usually happens to lieutenant governors is that there's an election, they win, and then lieutenant governor goes sits in that other mansion or wherever they go live and never get talked to again, because there's no requirement to include them in the process at all. And most of the time, that's just the end of it. So there's actually no compelling reason why anybody decent would want to jump on your ticket. Now, luckily, I had one in my back pocket, my wife, who's right over there. Heather has been, and a lot of people have asked me, they're like, why did you pick your wife? That seems weird. So a lot of people don't know that she is Spark's COO. And going back to a lesson that I learned in business school, you cannot have a successful business without a CEO and a COO. You need strategy, and you need anticipation and ingenuity, and you need somebody who goes, all right, that's a completely crazy idea, but I think I can implement it. You got to have both, and there is not a one person out there who can do both well. I can kind of half-ass the implementation. She'll probably shake her head because half-ass is probably too strong of a word. I doubt it. Maybe a quarter-ass it. I don't know. But at the same time, it's like if you don't have two, and I use Steve Jobs as an example. If you look at his career, when Steve Jobs has a CEO, boom, it's like this. The minute Wozniak leaves Apple, right off a cliff. Then he runs into John Lasseter, Pixar. Here we go again. Jumps over to Apple, picks up Tim Cook. As long as there's a COO back in Jobs, he's great. And when there's not a COO back in Steve Jobs, he's a crazy asshole. Like, that's it. He's just this guy out in the wilderness yelling stuff like, Palm top computing, it's the future in 1987. Everybody's like, yeah, whatever. Who knows? He was right. But he didn't have a COO who knew how to get him there. And so, like I said, luckily I have it in my back pocket, and so that is why she's on the ticket, is because between the two of us, we make one really good business person. And I have a belief that we also would make one really good executive branch. So the other lockout that we came by as a kind of surprise is that you have to be registered for the party that you run as before the year that you get elected in starts, which basically means that if you're not an independent by January 1st, 2015, you cannot change your party and run for office. Well, who does that benefit? Again, the parties. I mean, it doesn't benefit us. It doesn't seem like the only reason you would do that is, again, to lock people out, which is okay. I mean, if I was a party, I would do that. But it kind of sucks for the process because it makes it even harder and harder for people to, assuming we could even get by all of these things I talk about that would prevent people from running, there's all these other blindsiding things that pop up in the way. And it's really difficult. So running into these lockouts has been really interesting because both the primary lockout that we actually would occur, which is interesting, is to try to get on the debates. There are even more rules on getting onto the debates, as it turns out. I must be at least 10% in a poll before the debates start. I must raise at least $25,000. I'm trying to think what the other dumb ones are too. There's a bunch of stuff, and the idea was, like, at least at KT's defense, they don't want neo-Nazis showing up and getting on there. Okay, I understand that, I get it. But the problem was, Gatewood polled 9% last time around, and he didn't get to go to the debates. And that doesn't seem fair, honestly, because I think that would have been great to see him do that. It would have changed the entire conversation. But again, parties are in control of the process, and they locked it out. Well, it turns out that they hung most of their lockout on a criteria that I've already beaten, which is you must have 5 positive national news articles written about you in order to qualify. I already have that. So we got that. That's the one that would stop everybody in their tracks. I got that one done. If we do our jobs the rest of the way by August, it should be a shoo-in. And at that point, that's when things will get interesting because I'll have defeated all of the lockouts they can throw my way. And then we'll just see what happens. I'm trying to think of other process stuff. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Am I or should I jump into the issue stuff?
Yeah, jump in.
All right.
You covered it.
Here's the final lockout, and this one irritates me more than anything else. And it isn't really built as a lockout. This was sort of engineered over time. So it turns out issues are lockouts. And the reason why is because, I got contacted. I did an AMA on Reddit, and I got contacted by a guy who worked in politics, and I believe that he does because the stuff that he sent me was, I mean, as somebody who's not a politician, completely ridiculous. And one of the things he told me was I had given an answer to a question. Oh, I know what it was. The question was, so in northern and eastern Kentucky, the police have cracked down on the pill mills, and as a result, everybody has switched to heroin. What are you going to do about that? And I was like, I don't know. And I did get a little pushback, but I'm like, well, I don't think passing a law would ever stop a heroin user from getting a hit. I mean, these guys would like saw their own arms off if I said, hey, free hit, saw your arm off. Like, all right, here we go. What law am I going to pass that's going to stop that? That doesn't make any sense. And we could throw them all in jail, but that doesn't make any sense either. And I hadn't really thought about it. I didn't even know that was going on. But I was like, well, I'll get back to you. I'll look into it. So it turns out that I have an extensive network of people who know a lot of stuff. And one of my professors at Columbia is the world's preeminent expert on the economics of corruption. And his advice was, well, we know that passing laws and making harsher penalties don't stop addiction at all. So clearly step 1 is decriminalize addiction. Step 2 is disrupt the economics of drug trade. Not throw everybody in jail, just make it harder to move that stuff around and more expensive. And at some point, that ends up being the thing. It's like slow it down. And that starts grinding it to a halt. And you can get in there and mess with all kinds of little tiny levers that don't involve throwing massive amounts of people in jail. And it's kind of an interesting idea, and he's going to introduce me to a couple of other people who are world's experts in drug addiction and getting people off of heroin, and how to do that from I borrowed this from an NPR article I heard, but it turns out it's a stated thing. It's like laws work best when they are nudges, not shoves. So, for example, here's another issue I'll throw out there. Vaccinations. Should we require vaccinations? Well, I think what we ought to do instead is that I took a look at like how do people implement this policy, and it turns out that the state who's got the least number of opt-outs of all, surprisingly, is Mississippi. Mississippi has the highest vaccination rate of any state. And the reason why is because it's hard, but not impossible, but hard to opt out. They made it so you got to get like all kinds of stuff you could get if you really didn't want to get a vaccination for some reason. And I don't know why you wouldn't, but go ahead. They made it really hard to opt out. I think, okay, well, that's how you do it. I mean, basically, it's like you still have the option if you feel really strongly, okay, go ahead, but let's not make it like, oh, I just don't want it. Like, let's go, okay, you got to get all these other things. So my thing, and through the process of thinking about how these things work, actually, I should probably hit the downfall. So the problem with the issues is basically this. The parties are essentially trying to team build. They want you to join their team. And we as human beings are essentially like cognitive behavioral creatures. We join teams very easily. And I forget the name of this study. Actually, Chapman, do you remember the one, the blue-eye, brown-eye thing? What was that? The blue-eye, brown-eye thing from the late 60s? Elementary school. I forget the anybody know the name of it? So in the 1960s, there was a woman who tried this on her class of, I think they were like 8 or 9 or 10-year-olds or something, where in order to try to figure out like how fast do people institutionalize racism. And so on the first day, she said, blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people. It was roughly a half split. And she said during that day, the kids out at the playground, the blue-eyed kids got more recess time. And she said by the end of the day, the blue-eyed kids were like abusing the brown-eyed kids. Like they were actually beating them up and stuff like that. And also the test scores of the blue-eyed kids started going up. Brown-eyed kids started going down. The only thing that had changed was that morning she told them there was a difference between them. The next day she switched it. She said brown-eyed kids are now the cool kids. And these blue-eyed people, we don't like them. They're lazy. They don't do very well. And in that same afternoon, the thing completely switched. The brown-eyed kids started getting higher test scores. It's a famous study. It's like 50 years old now, and they actually went back and interviewed the kids who talked about how it was a seminal moment in their lives because they're like, holy crap. Like, can't believe that we can flip so quickly on these issues that more or less don't matter. And so team building is really, it's the same thing. It's like, I hate Duke. As do we all, I think, probably, right? But here's the thing. I don't mind. Coach K seems like a pretty decent dude. He actually said, like, he publicly went out and said he regretted not recruiting DeMarcus Cousins. And I was like, 5 years after the fact, because he coached him on the USA basketball team, and he was like, man, he's like, this guy's nothing like his reputation. He's an awesome guy. And Coach K said that. He actually called a press conference to announce that. I was like, wow, man, that's like really classic thing to do. I don't mind any of the people that play for Duke's basketball team. They seem like okay guys, but I hate the team. Because as a human being, I join tribes very quickly, and I affiliate with whoever. In fact, if you want to try this out, this is really fun. If you know anybody who's a Duke basketball fan, you can terrorize them, by the way. Odds are, if they're a Duke basketball fan and they're not from Durham or did not attend the school, you already know what the rest of their sports teams are. Can anybody guess how this plays out? Any ideas? Andrew already knows because it's the Yankees, Manchester United, Dallas Cowboys, maybe Pittsburgh if you're from around that area. In hockey, depending on how old you are, it's either the Avalanche or the Red Wings or Blackhawks as of late. And what other sports am I like? Jeff Gordon in NASCAR.
Lakers.
They picked all the winners.
Lakers.
All the winners. And the Lakers. Picked all the winners. That's what you did. You go, okay, who's the best? Like, okay, I'm not a soccer fan. Who's the best team? Okay, I'm a Man U fan. And that's how easily we join teams. I mean, that's basically what we do. Political parties know this, and they also know that basically we react to fear twice as strongly as we react to upside benefit. And so the easiest way to get somebody to join your team is to basically say, if that guy gets elected, the world is going to end. And people go, I don't know if I believe that, but I'm a little worried. And then they talk to other people who go, oh yeah, if that guy gets elected, the world's going to end. And then you go, oh crap, wow. Now I'm starting to become concerned about it. The issues are used to divide us, and a lot of the issues are not significant to society functioning properly on a daily basis. What do we all care about? How many stoplights do I hit on the way to work today? Is that pothole ever going to get fixed? Why the hell are the one-way streets still in Lexington? Like, that's the stuff that actually matters, and it turns out mayors have a higher approval rating than any elected official, mostly because they are nonpartisan and because they get stuff done. Like, that's basically it. The farther up the chain you go to the federal level, the less satisfaction there is with anybody who's involved in the process, is because they are just not doing anything of any use. And so we get into these arguments where, like, if you can name a bill that's gone through the legislature right now, it is probably around a hedge issue. And it's stuck in your head only because it's getting that attention. There's been a couple of odd ones that have floated through. There's an animal cruelty bill that looks like it's getting passed. It was about bees initially. The most hilarious thing that happened to that is right at the end, they carved out animal cruelty, all these provisions apply unless the animal has 2 legs. What do you think that is? That's really interesting. Did anybody ask for that? Like, where did that come from? Was there like a groundswell of like, look, it's cockfighting. That's basically it. So, if you look at the way that the law is structured and you look at the way that the issues are used to divide us, it's more of a bread and circuses thing. If this guy gets elected, they'll take away your guns. If this guy gets elected, they'll take away your abortions. Whatever it is, and people freak the hell out and they get blinders on, and that's it. And what nobody ever got excited about is if this guy gets elected, things might run slightly better by the end of it, and nobody will ever notice that I'm there. And that is how I will know if I had a good effect on the thing or not. And the way I'm going to do it is this. So I'm a technologist, and I understand how technology works. And it turns out that one of the things I discovered in business school was retail uses high-level big data algorithms to do really amazing things. For example, this happened a few years ago. There was a guy who started getting diaper coupons in the mail from Target. And he was like, but I have a couple of high school kids in my house. Nobody here is pregnant. This is ridiculous. Why are you guys sending me diaper coupons? He called up 3 weeks later to apologize because it turns out his daughter was pregnant. Here's the thing. She didn't know it. He did not either. Nobody in that house knew when diaper coupons started showing up in the mail that anybody in that house was pregnant. But big data absolutely knew. Well, they not with 100% certainty. They had 95, but that was good enough to start sending coupons out, just in case. And it turns out that they do all kinds of predictive stuff on us that we don't even know. And it's not bad stuff. It's stuff that if you actually have a choice, they can't override that. But if you don't, for example, if they have discovered that if you go into a wine shop and they're playing French music, more people will buy French wine. If you switch it to Italian, they will buy Italian wine. And it's really weird that we do this, but here's the thing. Nobody who went in there who meant to buy Italian wine and there was French music playing bought French wine. Well, I didn't say nobody, but probably nobody. Anybody with an opinion did their thing. Everybody else, you might be changed on it. Here's another one too. We have number permanence in our heads. So another study was given. Ask a bunch of students, how much does this bottle of wine cost? And more or less they say, $20. If the first question you ask is instead, what are the last 4 digits of your social security number? And then you say it out loud, and then you say, now, how much does this bottle of wine cost? If your last 4 digits of your social are 8,000 or higher, you say $40. And if they are 1,000 or less, you say 10. Because there's this number permanence thing. They don't seem to leave our brains quickly, which in my opinion is why gas stations have held on to that 0.99 so long. If I'm fueling up my car and I'm seeing a bunch of 9s and I walk in and I see a Coke for $2.50, I go, it's $2.50, whatever. I could buy 2 liters at Kroger for that, but I just go, I get a Coke, $2.50 is fine. So there's all kinds of things that they know about this. For example, if there's a display that shows up at the Gap, the display comes with a picture of the display. This color here, this color here, this color here. You must assemble this exactly to spec because their algorithms have predicted that this is the shape of the thing that will cause you to buy. And we all know this because have you ever noticed when you get to the clearance rack, it's a little weird? That's wrong. Like something is not right about this clearance rack compared to the rest of the store. The rest of the store, you're like, it flows, it kind of moves, like, okay, great. And the clearance rack, you're like, It's not that you don't want to go over there, but that's a mess. That thing is complete. We all know that. That's the reaction you get when you walk up to it. And so it turns out that these algorithms do other things as well. One thing in particular that I found interesting was a friend of mine who lives in Pikeville says that in the last year, a lot of chain restaurants have opened up. Now, I find that fascinating because chain restaurants open up locations based on where algorithms tell them is viable now and will be viable for the next 5 years. And if a lot of them started opening up in the same spot, that's got to mean that there are algorithms saying Pikeville is going to be more awesome 5 years from now. Get in there immediately. And so the question I would have is I would call Applebee's up and be like, hey, you guys opened up a restaurant in Pikeville. What are your algorithms telling you is going on here? And more importantly, why didn't you open one up in Moorhead? How close was that call? So if there are like 7 factors that you decide to open a restaurant up on, and Moorhead came in with 6, well, is that something the government can do? Is it a water quality issue? Well, we should probably get the water quality up, especially if they're going to drop a bunch of restaurants in somewhere. Is it the 2-lane road needs to be a 4-lane road? Is there a traffic problem? Like, what are your algorithms telling you? And they'll tell the government because we're not competing with them. And in fact, we would give them advanced information that they could use to drop a thing in. Fix the water, drop it on this corner? All right. And so you're seeing certain things like, for example, like I'm a big fan of government trying to juice the economy by helping companies out, but not by writing them checks, and especially not zero-sum game stuff where Indiana's going to pay me $6 million, and if you don't, I'm leaving. Well, okay, then go. But if in Woodford County right now, there's a distillery setting up shop that asked the local government for $1 million in tax incentives, when previously they had not. And the reason why was because they said, well, we need to upgrade our facility. We need new natural gas lines. We need electricity. They're in an area that has not had a significant population living in it for the last 100 years. And so when asked why they were requesting this now, they said, well, because you are going to have to upgrade all the lines that go through here. And that runs right through Millville, which is a population of like 1,000 or so. And all of these 1,000 people are going to get all of their stuff upgraded because we're going to make sure that when you guys do that, we can receive that at our plant. And so this $1 million not only helps them, but it actually improves the lives of all of the people that are in the way, which is absolutely fantastic. And so the way I would do economic extensions is prove to me there's a network effect that I don't see that accidentally helps out a lot of people, and we'll take a really hard look at this. And so that's the kind of solutions that I'm talking about bringing, because I don't use the word internet with air quotes, because the internet is a technology that's been around almost 35, 40 years at this point. And that's like saying color TV in 1980. There are not little people living in my color TV in 1980. Nobody campaigned on that. This is not arcane technology. It's so much around us that my children do not understand why they can't pause live TV. They don't get it. What do you mean I'm not on the internet? Why would I not be on the internet? You have the generation, the youngest generation, thinking that the internet is like air, and the oldest generation, 9% of whom have never sent an email in their lives. There's kind of a problem here. We need to catch up. We need somebody who understands technology to go in and say, you know what? Why do I have to go to the DMV to get my automobile registration? Can't they mail that to me automatically every year unless I opt out? That would drop the lines by 90%. In fact, why can't I get every document from the government that I might need to get online? And that's not to say online only. That's to say that you can get it online, which means that all of the places are still open so that the people that don't have the technology or don't want to learn it, which is cool, can still go in, but now lines are 90% shorter. And now people have more time to explain to them how to do the thing, and so on and so forth. And so that's the kind of thing I'm trying to bring to the table, and that's why the issues matter a lot less. But that said, I understand that people do want to know to make sure I'm not crazy, so I understand that. It's okay. I would say this though, when on the issues, there is one specific thing that matters more than anything else, which is I am an unaligned candidate who, as governor, will have no reach whatsoever into the legislature. I also do not have a plethora of laws that I would like to pass other than streamlining some stuff a bit. So I am not considering any large issue legislation. So the question you also have to ask is, am I likely to see that show up on my desk? Because as currently happens, the answer is apparently, four-legged animals and bees, being protected is pretty cool, and that's rolling through. But other very much more contentious stuff is more or less unlikely to occur. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. And like I said, again, it's like I'll take anything. I would also say on the issue of questions, I also like you could also give me like really hard, sort of more philosophical questions. I don't mind. I will tell you if I give you if I answer where I'm lying, because I like to make stuff up occasionally. So, but I'll let you know if I'm doing that. So, yes. Look at me. Yes.
For the last 50 years or more, really smart people, as well as politicians, have looked at Eastern Kentucky and have tried to find a jobs model for it that didn't involve coal mining.
Right.
Now more than ever, that seems relevant because the
yes.
last rigs, the coal jobs are going away. Nobody's been very successful at finding a post-coal economy.
Right.
Do you think that you would be, or is that something that the state government even plausibly would have a role? You mentioned a little bit there about the Applebee's and pipeline. That's great.
Yes.
But there are 70,000 people in pipeline that can't all work it out.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, and so it isn't that the Applebee's creates the jobs per se, it's that the fact that Applebee's is going in indicates there's something that's on the upswing. And it isn't necessarily the Applebee's going in that causes it, they're following it. Like they see something that's going on that their algorithm is saying like this is improving. And it turns out if I had to guess, I think it's the medical university there is what they're actually having. That thing is like ramping up like crazy.
Pike County is unique in the region. That is probably, along with maybe Hazard, one of the two areas.
Yes.
It does seem to be doing okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so my guess is this, is so I'm looking at other strategies to do it, but right now my best guesses are twofold. One, I'm thinking about, and again, this would be changed by more data, or for example, I'm following the SOAR guys, and they have a lot of very good ideas, and so I'm keeping close tabs on that. And I'm actually going to be going to their conference, I think, in May to talk more about the solutions they have, because if anybody has a handle on it, it's them. But basically, it's like, where can we apply the least amount of force to something that's probably already working? Or to give you a different example, I'm a big proponent of kicking rolling balls downhill, not building cities in the desert. If something has already got a little bit of traction, we can get behind that, but otherwise, let's not. So for example, locally, the brewing community is going nuts. Seems to me that would be something to get behind, and luckily, nobody's against it, so it's more or less working. But that would be something where if they said, oh, we have a major problem, here it is, I would really listen to that, locally here. And so the two ideas that I've had on there twofold. One is the easy one, which is I would take a strategy similar to what the government has done with troops in Iraq, which was after the surge and they did the drawdown, they established an enclave system where essentially now we've got people there, but they're focused in specific areas to where they can rapid respond to things if they have to. It seems to me that the economic development that's occurring is happening mostly in a couple of specific spots. And so maybe we start out by focusing on those only, and then again, look for those rolling balls and kick them downhill a little bit, and then keep our eyes on the network effects. Because usually what happens is if one place comes up, then this starts spreading out. To give you a less vague explanation of that sentence, this happens all the time with startups and cities that eventually become tech hubs. The reason why cities become tech hubs is because they have one startup that just blows up like a supernova. Austin, Texas was Dell. Seattle was Microsoft. Currently, Des Moines, Iowa has Dawala there, which is a multi-billion-dollar pre-IPO. And when one of these things goes off, I do not know how to make that happen. But once it does, once economic activity starts to improve in an area, people start making more money and then going, hey, you know what, I might want to start a company. They spin off, they move into the next county over, and then they do their thing. And so the idea is if we can concentrate it around stuff that is more or less already working and accelerate it, then that allows people to eventually spin off once these network effects start to occur. It's a long process and there's no simple answer to it, but that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is to find out, there aren't a lot of factories out there in Eastern Kentucky, but there's a few. And the question would be, who's running a capacity right now? And if you could, would you hire more people? Because factories have a capacity constraint. Take let's say a hypothetical factory, 200 people are employed there. If they're at full employment, it doesn't matter if they want to hire or want to make more, whatever it is, they can't because they got a building and that's that big. And expanding those is a very difficult decision for companies to make because it's really expensive to double your capacity. It's a lot of upfront money you gotta have to drop this thing in. And I got this idea from my friend Greg Cook, who runs Stone Brewing. He doubled his capacity in Escondido, California about a few years ago. And then unfortunate timing, or fortunate depending on how you look at it, all of a sudden a couple of deals that he was working on, one in Berlin, Germany for 5 years, which looked like it was gonna fall apart, and another deal in Richmond, Virginia, which he thought was done, both came online at the same time and he was completely tapped out. And here's a guy who basically, he's self-funded, had no access to additional capital, and was basically constrained by the fact he's like, I'm completely mortgaged out, I just doubled, I could triple again, and it would work, but I am capped. And so the question would be, can we find those guys and can we vet them properly so we know this is not a shakedown? Basically, if you guys need to build an extra facility, the government can borrow money at a lower rate than you guys can. Perhaps we borrow the money for you guys, you pay us the higher rate, or the rate that you guys could make, or we negotiate it based off of the network effects in the community or whatever. But like I said, I discovered I'm really good at financial forensics accounting, and so I can actually parse these deals. Let me give you a really interesting idea I had. I don't know of anybody else who's doing this, but I had this weird idea, and it's actually, I don't know why anybody else is doing this, that's why I'm kind of questioning it. So one of the things I found out is that when I launched on Reddit was they said, well, what are you going to do about bridges over the Ohio River, which is not a big thing for me because I live in Versailles. So, I hadn't thought about bridges. And so they're building one in Louisville, they're getting ready to build one in Cincinnati maybe. And in Louisville, Indiana financed its piece with a public-private partnership, which is basically, hey, who's got a hedge fund with $3 billion, we'll kick you a guaranteed 8% return for 40 years, drop the money in. I haven't looked at that deal structure. I don't know if it's really good or not, but I would imagine it is really good because somebody took the deal. That makes sense or not? Like, it's a good deal for a hedge fund if a hedge fund buys it. Like, that's proof in the pudding. Or put it another way, when I hire salespeople, my first question is, why are you available? Because if you're a good salesperson, shouldn't you be fully employed right now? So what are you doing? So the same thing goes, that's got to be a good deal because a hedge fund bought it. Well, and they bought it probably at looking for a 7 or 8% return. $3 billion is actually chasing 2 if it gets lucky. And I don't think government people know that, but I know that because, again, I'm like kind of a finance geek. So then on the other side, we've got this state pension that needs a 7.5% return every year. And I'm like, wait a minute. We have the money that needs the return that we're giving to these guys, and they want this deal. Why don't we take it? that should be something we should drop the money in. We structured it, guaranteed 7.5% return. We should buy our own damn bridges. Nobody's doing that. And I'm not sure why that is, or maybe there's a problem with execution. Maybe that's when the corruption factor comes in. I don't know. I've asked around and I can't find anybody who can answer that, so I'm researching that idea. But that's, again, something I'm kind of working on, trying to figure out, why has that not been done before? Or if it has been done, what happened?
Could be the pensioners are alarmed at the idea of owning a bridge.
Well, it's okay. It returns 8%. I mean, I'm alarmed at putting my money in the stock market and not knowing I'm getting 8%. If I buy a bridge, I'm getting 8%. That seems to be a safer bet. But yeah, you're probably right. It might be that because, again, it sounds like a crazy idea, but I don't know. Nobody's done it. I'd be curious. Yes?
It's going to be an interesting question for you.
Excellent. I love those.
I'm a 15-year educator and an elementary school principal. I am a big proponent of an approach called universal design for learning, which is using technology and teachers more and administrators as a Sherpa to help students guide the process and understand the curriculum.
Is this like Khan Academy?
Huh?
Like Khan Academy?
Sort of.
Got it.
Sort of.
Okay. Because I like Khan Academy. I don't know that I would say that's what we got to switch to, but I like it.
The problem is, in the state of Kentucky, we had a person who came in to be the Department of Education and modeled us based on West Virginia. I cannot go out and solicit the community to do a public-private partnership now legally. I
Okay.
cannot go ask any business in my community to partner with my school to get the technology that I need.
Do you have any idea what the reason for that is?
It's a legal thing.
Okay, well-
Some people got their hands smacked for
Oh,
doing
okay.
the wrong thing.
This is like when somebody puts that note up saying your mom doesn't work here, which
Yeah.
stops nobody.
Yeah, and it's kind of,
Yeah.
you got one person out of 20 put their hand in the cookie
Right.
jar, so let's just slap everyone.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of rules like that.
And the biggest problem is, we haven't had book money in 10 years from the state of Kentucky. We're required to fund that out of our local funds. My local funds have gone from $70,000 to $14,000 in
Yeah.
10 years. I'm expected to buy computers, everything I can with that money. So, ideas on deregulating that sort of
Yeah,
private
so
partnership.
this is probably the weakest area that I have, but that said, here's how I plan to approach it. So first of all, I have my sister and brother-in-law are both teachers. One's up in Illinois and one's in Iowa. So I hear from them all the time about teacher stuff. And I got to say that it sounds to me, and I'm a generalist, I'm a pattern guy, it sounds to me like most of the problems they have were put in place by politicians who don't know how to run stuff. Or here's a good analogy. Turns out in finance, if you run private equity, a large fund that buys companies to take them private and spin them back out, you are more likely to buy retail. Why? People who have money think they understand retail because they go shopping. Politicians think they understand the educational system because they had teachers at some point. They don't. They don't understand it any more than private equity understands how to run a retail shop. It is way more complicated and they have no idea what they're doing. And then these people who have no idea what they're doing try to pass laws based on their idea of what the thing is, impose it on the teachers, and then you're stuck at, doing these things that make no damn sense. How do you unwind that? Well, so in the startup world, when you do a startup, step 0 is something called customer development, where basically go ask people if they want this thing. Because they probably don't, as it turns out. I mean, you might have an idea you really, really like, but at the end of the day, they'd be like, nah, I wouldn't buy that. But, well, what would cause you to buy that? What would be the thing you'd be like, oh, actually, well, if it did this, I might actually buy that. And then the question, too, is like, would you buy it right now for half the price because that's how you fund this? Customer development at a government level has only been done in a couple of places, but every time they've tried it, it's paid huge dividends. And it basically involves get a team together, go out and ask everybody who does the thing, how's it going? What would you like to fix? Come back with those 10,000 things that they go, oh man, if only we could just knock this thing out in 2 seconds, it would be great. Compile the list of easiest to hardest, start at the top, and just start knocking these things out. That's basically it. I would be more inclined to believe a teacher about how an educational system should be run than a politician all day long. And I believe that it is probably the misunderstanding at the political level that has caused most of the problems. We talk about the educational system is broken. I think they broke it. I think that's what happened. So that's where my sympathies lie. And so it's going to be a lot of discovery to try to figure out how to unwind this stuff. So like around property taxes, there's some weird stuff. It turns out like in the state of Kentucky, as you already know, property taxes are highly restricted because, well, we used to actually get 30% of our revenue out of these damn things, which is too high. But they overcompensated to stop it, and now as a result, you can't raise them to a point now it's too low. And it's very difficult to unwind that stuff. But I'm looking for like, maybe tricks to work it out. Like I said, I haven't taken a good dive at this yet, but that's how I'm going to approach that problem, and then we'll just see. But it's mostly going to be asking people like you, how the hell do we fix this? Because I don't believe the politicians that pass the law know.
And to kind of give you an aside there, they've just mandated a 1% statewide increase for teachers or 2% this year, but they gave us no more money to do it.
Yeah.
So that's coming out of our children.
Oh, great. Yeah. See, again, it's like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or they carved out like $10 million for something in the bill recently. I'm like, we're running deficit, guys. Where's that coming from? You can't, like, I don't know, this reminds me of like, being like people who have never run businesses before trying to run a business, Well, we've got billions of dollars. We'll just $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and all the next thing you know, you're bankrupt.
Sure.
And so, yeah. All right, so it looks like we got to wrap it up. So then we got like a good burning question? Or?
We can hang out outside too and take
Yeah,
questions.
I don't have to go anywhere. I just have to clear the room up. So yeah.
There's a lot of push about saving the horse industry in Kentucky and possibly going to casino gambling. Do you think the horse industry needs saved, and do you think casinos is the answer?
It doesn't look to me, so I haven't dug into it yet, but the passive glance that I've taken at it looks like they might be in trouble a little bit. I don't think we need to give industries anything to keep them around. Nobody's saving the horse. I don't know that we need to save the horse industry. That said, I would not like to see them go either. So I'd be curious to see if they had ideas, and usually there's like, if they have a tweak, they're like, oh, you know what, if we did this, boom, we're back in business. Well, okay, I'll take a look at that. But if it's like, write us a check to keep us around, no. And that goes for any industry, by the way. You've got to show me that there's some way to get a growth out of this thing other than just stabilizing. I want to keep a dinosaur around. If it's things just falling apart, okay, it's not. I mean, there you go. I would not be happy about that at all, but unless there's an easy fix for it, I don't know. The casino gaming in particular, part of the way that they're thinking about fixing this is just raises revenues at racetracks and then keeps the horse racing going. That's true. I believe that that's the case. I did not like the initial proposal where they was going to give the casino licenses to the horse tracks. So in Pennsylvania, they sold the licenses to casinos and whatnot for a lot of money. And I think if that ended up getting passed, those licenses better be getting sold for a lot of money. Keeneland can have one if they buy it. They cannot have one just because they want one. So that's how I would approach that. But yeah, it's like I said again, it's like any business that's struggling. If it's because there's a tweak we're not implementing, well, what is the tweak? Let me know what it is. But I don't really have any preconceived notions about any of this stuff. It's more or less, does this work? Explain to me how this works. Let's see if the model looks like it's going to fly. Especially if it's been done somewhere else, we'll just copy that. So that's basically it. So hopefully it doesn't sound like a dodge. I mean, that's literally it. Like, I'm not being intentionally vague. I don't know actually whether or not that makes sense to do. I have no clue. But that shows up on my desk, I'm going to start digging in. And in fact, I'm going to show up the moment it's filed, honestly, and start looking at that just in there. One of the things that Washington State did, and I'm going to end on this, a friend of mine at Washington State set up a group to analyze bills being filed at the executive level. And there was no requirement to talk to this group. But what they would do is, bill gets filed, group analyzes it, says, okay, unintended consequences are this. And then they put their stamp of approval. This will work, this will not work, we don't know, here's why. And so with no requirement to actually come and talk to these guys at all, they started issuing their opinions as soon as these things got filed. And within about a month, the legislature in Washington started just showing up over there before they filed. They said, hey, what's your group think about this? We don't want to file bad law because we have to do this twice. So let's anticipate this. If you guys are going to do all the downline research for us, well, here it is. Let us know how this works. And so that's how I would also approach it too, is let these guys know, hey, this is bad law. This came in bad and it's going to stay bad the whole way. We need to stop. But at the same time, it's like, I don't think legislators want to file bad law. I just don't think they know another way. And so that's one way to ensure that they know what they're doing. And, hopefully that'll work. We'll see how it goes. All right, guys, thanks. And like I said, again, we have time more out there. So appreciate it.
If anybody here would like a bumper sticker,
Yes.
Make sure